You've been following her for 3 weeks, Johnny. What the hell are you doing? Vincent's voice cut through the silence of the black Mercedes as they sat parked across from the Chicago Transit Authority station. Rain streaked the windshield, but Johnny's eyes never left the figure of Maria Santos as she climbed the steps. Her worn coat pulled tight against the October wind. "Just drive, Vince." Johnny's voice was flat, dangerous in the way that made most men step back, but not Vincent. They'd known each other since they were kids running numbers in Little Italy. "This ain't like you, boss, following your old cleaning lady." "People are starting to talk." Johnny turned, his grey eyes like steel. "Let them talk, just drive." The Mercedes pulled away from the curb, following the CTA bus at a careful distance. Johnny had been doing this for weeks now, ever since Maria had given her notice. Said she found work closer to home, better hours. He'd accepted it professionally, paid her final check with a generous bonus. But something nagged at him. Maria had worked for him for 3 years, never missed a day, never asked for anything extra. "She's getting off," Vincent muttered, slowing the car. Johnny watched as Maria descended from the bus in a neighborhood that made his jaw clench. Abandoned storefronts, broken streetlights. This wasn't better, this was desperation. Hey, before I continue with Johnny's story, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying this tale of unexpected romance and danger, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. Your support means everything, so please give this story a thumbs up if it's keeping you on the edge of your seat. Now back to Johnny's shocking discovery. They followed at a distance as Maria walked 3 blocks through streets that even Johnny's men avoided after dark. She stopped at a building that should have been condemned years ago. Fire escapes hung at dangerous angles, windows were boarded up, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. "Jesus Christ," Vincent whispered. Johnny said nothing, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the leather seat. He'd grown up poor, but this wasn't poor, this was poverty. This was the kind of desperation that broke people. Maria disappeared inside the building, and Johnny made a decision that would change everything. Circle the block, slowly. As they drove past again, Johnny saw a young woman emerge from the same building. Even from across the street, even in the dim light of a flickering street lamp, he could see she was beautiful. Early 20s with her mother's graceful walk, but something else, a strength that showed in the way she carried herself, despite the circumstances. "That's got to be the daughter," Vincent said quietly. "Maria mentioned her sometimes. Works 2 jobs, trying to save money for college." The young woman Tati looked both ways before hurrying down the street, probably heading to one of those jobs. Johnny watched until she disappeared around the corner, and something shifted inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in 15 years of running Chicago's most profitable operations. "Take me home," he said finally. But as they drove through the city toward his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Johnny's mind wasn't on the meetings tomorrow or the shipment coming in from Miami. It was on broken fire escapes and a young woman's determined stride through streets that could swallow dreams whole. He was going to do something about this. The question was what and how to do it without destroying everything he'd built. Believer 2. 3 days later, Johnny stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Millennium Tower, but his mind was still in that crumbling neighborhood. His legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction, real estate generated millions, but his other operations generated the kind of money that bought silence and fear in equal measure. His phone buzzed. A text from Vincent. "She's working double shifts at that diner on Ashland. Kid looks exhausted." Johnny had asked Vincent to keep watching, to learn their patterns. Not for anything sinister, he told himself it was curiosity. But deep down, he knew it was something more dangerous than curiosity. It was responsibility. Maria had worked in his home for 3 years, had seen him at his worst and his most human. She'd never judged, never gossiped, never asked for anything but fair pay for honest work. And he'd let her walk into that hellhole. "Mr. Torino?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here." "Cancel it," Johnny said, still staring out at the lake. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." An hour later, he was walking through the South Side in clothes that cost more than most people made in a month, drawing stares that ranged from curious to hostile. He'd left Vincent with the car 6 blocks away. This was something he needed to do alone. The diner was called Mel's, and the paint was peeling off the sign. Through the greasy window, Johnny could see Tati moving between tables with practiced efficiency. She wore a pink uniform that had seen better years, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that swayed as she navigated between customers. He pushed through the door and the little bell above it chimed weakly. "Seat yourself, hun," Tati called without looking up from the coffee pot she was refilling. "Menus on the table." Johnny slid into a booth in the corner, one that gave him a clear view of the entire diner and two possible exits' old habits. When Tati approached with a coffee cup, their eyes met for the first time. She was even more beautiful up close. Dark eyes that held intelligence and wariness in equal measure, high cheekbones that spoke of mixed heritage, and a smile that seemed genuine despite the exhaustion he could see around her eyes. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. "Please." Johnny's voice came out rougher than he intended. "And whatever you recommend for lunch." "Well, that depends on whether you're feeling brave or if you want to play it safe," Tati said with a grin that transformed her entire face. "The meatloaf's actually pretty good, but the chef, and I use that term loosely, has some strong opinions about seasoning." Despite everything, Johnny found himself smiling. "I'll take my chances with the meatloaf. Living dangerously. I like that in a customer." She scribbled on her pad. "I'll put the order in." As she walked away, Johnny noticed other things. The way she paused to check on an elderly man who was stretching one cup of coffee across an entire afternoon. How she slipped an extra piece of pie to a mother with two young children. The way she moved like someone accustomed to being on her feet for 12 hours straight. When she brought his meal, Johnny surprised himself by asking, "How long have you worked here?" "About 8 months, Tati said, setting down the plate. "It's not glamorous, but it pays better than my morning job at the grocery store." "2 jobs?" "3, actually. I clean offices downtown after this shift." She shrugged like it was nothing, but Johnny caught the slight sag in her shoulders. "Saving for school. Loyola University accepted me for next fall, but scholarship money only goes so far." Johnny cut into the meatloaf, mind racing. "What do you want to study?" "Social work," Tati said, and something lit up in her eyes. "I want to help kids who grow up like I did. Show them there are ways out, ways up." Before Johnny could respond, the bell chimed again and 3 men walked in. Johnny recognized the type immediately, street thugs looking for easy targets. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, but he forced himself to stay still. Well, one of them said loudly, "Look what we got here. Rich boy slumming it in the wrong neighborhood." Tati stepped forward, her body language shifting from friendly to protective. "They're just here for food, Marcus. Leave them alone." "I ain't talking to you, girl. I'm talking to Mr. Fancy Suit here." Marcus's eyes fixed on Johnny's Rolex. "That's a nice watch. Bet it costs more than my mama's rent." The diner had gone quiet. Other customers were looking away, pretending not to see. Johnny recognized the dynamic. This was Marcus's territory, and he was making a show of power. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd involved Tati. Johnny stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. "The lady asked you to leave. I'd suggest you listen." Marcus laughed, but it was forced. Something in Johnny's eyes had registered, some predatory stillness that smart men recognized and stupid men ignored. "You threatening me, old man?" "No," Johnny said softly. "I'm giving you a chance to walk out of here with your pride intact, but that window's closing fast." The standoff lasted 10 seconds that felt like minutes. Then Marcus jerked his head toward the door. "Come on. This place smells like failure anyway." After they left, Tati turned to Johnny with new respect in her eyes. "Thank you. Marcus has been causing problems for weeks. Are you safe here?" "Safe enough." But her smile was tight. "This neighborhood isn't great, but it's what I can afford." As Johnny paid his check, leaving a tip that was probably more than Tati made in a week, he made another decision, one that would either save them both or destroy everything he'd built. He was going to help her. The question was how to do it without revealing who he really was. 3. That evening, Johnny sat in his study with a glass of 30-year-old scotch, staring at a file Vincent had compiled. Tati's full name was Tatiana Santos, 22 years old, daughter of Maria Santos and a father who disappeared when she was 7. High school valedictorian despite working part-time throughout. Community college graduate with a 4.0 GPA. 3 jobs, all legitimate, all exhausting. No criminal record, no drug use, no associations with gangs or criminal organizations. In Johnny's world, that made her rarer than diamonds. His phone rang. "Yeah? Boss, you need to know something." Vincent's voice was tight. "That building where Maria and her daughter live? It's owned by Tommy Marconi." Johnny's blood went cold. Tommy Marconi was old-school Chicago mob, but small-time and vicious. The kind of man who squeezed every penny out of people who couldn't fight back. Rent situation? Behind 3 months. Marconi's been patient because Maria cleans his social club for half what anyone else would charge. But word is, he's getting pressure to clear out the building. Wants to sell to developers. Johnny closed his eyes. This was worse than he thought. How long do they have? Maybe a month. Maybe less if Marconi gets impatient. After hanging up, Johnny walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Tatey was probably finishing her 3rd shift of the day, unaware that she was about to lose even the small stability she'd managed to build. He could fix this with one phone call. Tommy Marconi was nothing compared to Johnny's organization, but that would raise questions, draw attention to connections that needed to stay hidden. No, this required a more subtle approach. The next morning, Johnny had Vincent drive him to a construction site in Lincoln Park. Torino Development was putting up luxury condos, and the project was ahead of schedule and under budget. The site foreman, Mike Sullivan, had been with Johnny for 8 years and knew better than to ask too many questions. "Mike, I need you to hire some additional cleaning crew. Specifically, I need you to offer a position to this woman." Johnny handed him Maria's information. "Full benefits, union wages, flexible hours." Mike looked at the paper. "Boss, we've already got cleaning covered by Patterson Services. Then we'll have extra coverage. And Mike, the offer needs to come from Patterson directly. Make it look legitimate. If she has a daughter looking for work, find something for her too. Office assistant, maybe. College-friendly hours. Consider it done. One more thing, that apartment building on South Racine, the one owned by Tommy Marconi, I want you to make him an offer for the building. Generous offer. Tell him you want to renovate it for low-income housing." Mike's eyebrows rose. "How generous?" "Generous enough that he can't refuse, but make sure all the current tenants have the option to stay at reduced rent." As Johnny left the construction site, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It took him a moment to realize it was from the diner's ancient cash register receipt, where Tati had written "Thank you for yesterday" in careful handwriting. He stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back, "Thank you for the excellent service." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, the meatloaf really was terrible, wasn't it? Despite everything, Johnny smiled. "The worst I've ever had. I'll definitely be back." This time her response was immediate. "You're either brave or crazy. I haven't decided which." "Maybe both," Johnny typed, then deleted it. Instead he sent, "Good service is worth the risk." As Vincent drove him to his next meeting, something about shipping schedules and territorial disputes, Johnny found himself thinking about Tatey's smile and the way she'd stepped between him and Marcus without hesitation. In his world, loyalty was bought with fear or money, but she'd shown loyalty for no reason except that it was right. It was dangerous thinking for a man in his position. But as the Mercedes navigated through Chicago traffic, Johnny realized he was past caring about danger. Some risks were worth taking. The question was whether Tati would see it the same way, once she learned who he really was. 4. 2 weeks later, Maria Santos stood in the gleaming office of Patterson Cleaning Services, trying not to fidget with her purse strap. The offer had come out of nowhere: full-time position, health benefits, and wages that were double what she'd been making cleaning the mob boss's social club. "Mrs. Santos," the hiring manager said with a warm smile, "we're very impressed with your references. When can you start?" "Tomorrow," Maria said, hardly believing her luck. "But I should mention I might need some flexibility." "My daughter. Actually, we have a position that might interest her as well. Administrative assistant for our downtown office. Part-time. Perfect for someone in school." Maria's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand. "Why us?" "Good workers are hard to find," the manager said simply, "and someone gave you a very strong recommendation." That evening, Maria hurried home to share the news with Tati, who was getting ready for her shift at the diner. The apartment was cramped and cold, but Maria had managed to make it feel like home with second-hand furniture and family photos. "Mija," she said, setting down grocery bags, real groceries, not the day-old bread they usually survived on. "You'll never believe what happened today." Tati looked up from lacing her work shoes, and Maria saw the exhaustion her daughter tried so hard to hide. "Good news, I hope?" "The best news. I got a real job, with benefits, and they want to offer you a position too." For a moment, Tati just stared. Then she sank onto their threadbare couch. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but sometimes angels show up when you need them most." 3 floors down, Johnny sat in his Mercedes watching their window. He'd seen the lights come on, had watched Maria's excited gestures through the thin curtains, Vincent was beside him, as always, but this time he wasn't complaining about the surveillance. "You did good, boss," Vincent said quietly. "Girl deserves a break." Johnny didn't respond. He was watching Tatey appear at the window, her silhouette backlit by the lamp inside. Even from this distance he could see the relief in her posture, the way her shoulders finally relaxed. His phone buzzed. A message from the same number that had been texting him sporadically over the past 2 weeks. They'd developed an odd friendship through those messages. Nothing deep, nothing personal. Just small conversations about books, movies, the weather. She still didn't know who he really was, and he preferred it that way. "You'll never guess what happened," her text read. "My mom got a miracle job offer today, with benefits." Johnny typed carefully, "That's wonderful news. You must be relieved." "I am, but I'm also scared. Good things don't usually happen to people like us. Maybe they should happen more often." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response came. "Do you believe in guardian angels?" Johnny stared at the message for a long time. Finally, he typed, "I believe some people deserve protection, even if they don't know where it's coming from." That's a beautiful way to think about it. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the first day of something better. How can you be so sure? "Because I'm going to make sure of it," Johnny thought, but he typed, "Sometimes you have to have faith." A week later, Johnny was back at Mel's diner, but this time Tatey wasn't working. The elderly man behind the counter, Mel himself, explained that she'd given notice to focus on her new job and preparation for college. "Smart girl," Mel said, wiping down the counter. "Too smart for this place, but I'm going to miss her." Customers loved her. Johnny left a generous tip and walked out into the Chicago afternoon. His plan was working perfectly. Maria had started her new position, and the building sale to Torino Development had gone through without Tommy Marconi ever knowing who was really behind the offer. But as he walked to where Vincent waited with the car, Johnny realized his plan had a flaw he hadn't anticipated. He missed her, missed the quick wit in their text conversations, missed the way she moved through the diner like she could handle anything the world threw at her. And now that she was safe, now that her family was secure, he had no excuse to stay in her orbit, unless he created one. That evening, Johnny stood in his study, looking at an envelope that had arrived by messenger. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala being held next week, something for at-risk youth, hosted by several prominent Chicago families. He made a decision that was either brilliant or insane. Picking up his phone, he called Patterson Cleaning Services and asked to speak with their new administrative assistant. "Patterson Services, this is Tatiana." "Miss Santos," Johnny said, his heart beating faster than it had during any business negotiation. "This is Jonathan Torino. I'm organizing a charity event and I'm told you're excellent at administrative coordination." There was a pause. "Mr. Torino, from Torino Development." "That's right. I have a proposal that might interest you. Would you have time to meet tomorrow to discuss it?" Another pause. Longer this time. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind that could help you finish college faster and help a lot of kids in the process." He could almost hear her thinking. Finally, "I can meet during my lunch break, but somewhere public." Smart girl, Johnny thought. "There's a coffee shop called Blue Note on Michigan Avenue." 1 o'clock? "I'll be there." After hanging up, Johnny poured himself a scotch and wondered what the hell he was doing. This was exactly the kind of personal involvement his father had warned him against, the kind of weakness that got men in his position killed. But as he looked out at the city lights, Johnny realized he was past caring about the rules. Some things were worth the risk. The question was whether Tatey would think so too. 5. The Blue Note was exactly the kind of place Johnny had expected Tatey to choose, busy enough for safety, quiet enough for conversation, and expensive enough to remind them both of the gulf between their worlds. He arrived 15 minutes early and chose a corner table where he could watch the door. When she walked in, Johnny's breath caught. Gone was the tired diner waitress in a worn uniform. This was a young professional woman in a simple black dress and blazer that probably cost a fraction of what his tie cost, but looked perfect on her. Her hair was down, framing her face, and she carried herself with confidence despite the slight uncertainty in her eyes. She spotted him immediately, not surprising, since he was probably the only man in the place wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. "Mr. Torino," she said, extending her hand as she reached the table. "Please call me Jonathan." Her handshake was firm, direct. "Thank you for meeting me. Can I get you something to drink?" "Coffee black," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "So what's this about, Mr. Jonathan?" Johnny signaled the waitress before turning his attention back to Tatey. I'm hosting a charity gala next week. 200 guests, several major donors, all focused on creating opportunities for at-risk youth in Chicago. Sounds like a worthy cause. It is, but here's my problem. I'm good at business, but I'm terrible at understanding what these kids actually need. I need someone who knows that world, who can speak to the reality of growing up with limited opportunities. Tatey's eyes narrowed slightly. And you think I'm that person because you worked 3 jobs to put yourself through community college and you're still fighting to get your degree. Because you want to study social work to help kids like yourself. Because you understand what it means to need a guardian angel. The last phrase hit home. Johnny could see it in her face, but instead of backing down, she leaned forward. How do you know so much about me, Jonathan? It was a fair question, and Johnny had prepared for it. Patterson Services provides cleaning for several of my buildings. When I asked for recommendations for someone with your background, your name came up. Half true, which was better than most things he said in business. What exactly would this job entail? Help me plan an event that actually matters. Work with potential scholarship recipients. Make sure the money goes to programs that work. Not just programs that sound good in speeches. Johnny paused. The pay would be $5,000 for 2 weeks of work. Tatey's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. $5,000? The event will raise over $1 million. $5,000 is a reasonable consulting fee. She set down the cup carefully. That's more than I make in 3 months. Then you're being underpaid for your skills. For a long moment they looked at each other across the small table. Johnny could see her thinking, weighing the offer against her instincts. Why me, really? She asked finally. Chicago is full of social workers and youth counselors with more experience. Because I can't stop thinking about you, Johnny thought. Because you're the first person in 10 years who's made me want to be better than what I am. Because when I look at you, I remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond money and power. But he said, because you haven't been corrupted by the system yet. You still believe change is possible. And you don't? Johnny considered the question. I used to think change was impossible, that people were what they were and the best you could do was manage the damage. What changed your mind? You did, he thought. But he said, someone reminded me that guardian angels show up when you need them most. Tatey's eyes widened slightly. Those were her exact words from their text conversation. But Johnny kept his expression neutral, giving her nothing to grasp. I'll do it, she said finally. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to meet the scholarship recipients before the event. I want to verify that the money is actually going where you say it is. And I want your word that this is legitimate, not some elaborate way to take advantage of my family's situation. The directness of it caught Johnny off guard. In his world, people approached him with calculated deference or calculated aggression. Nobody just asked for his word and expected to get it. You have my word, he said. This is about helping kids, not about anything else. Mostly true, he told himself. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you're available. My office is in the Millennium Tower. The penthouse level? Johnny smiled. 42nd floor, close enough. As they shook hands again, Johnny's phone buzzed with a text. Vincent, probably, with some crisis that needed immediate attention. But Johnny ignored it. For the first time in years, business could wait. Tatiana, he said as she stood to leave. Tati, nobody calls me Tatiana except my mother when she's angry. Tati then, I'm looking forward to working with you. She smiled the same smile that had lit up Mel's diner, and Johnny felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous and wonderful and completely inappropriate for a man in his position. But as he watched her walk away, Johnny realized that appropriate had never gotten him anything worth having. Maybe it was time to try something else. Maybe it was time to try being worthy of someone like her. 6. Tati's first day at Torino Development started with a problem. The elevator to the 42nd floor required a key card she didn't have, and the security guard at the front desk looked at her like she was trying to scam her way into Fort Knox. I'm supposed to meet Jonathan Torino at 9, she said for the 3rd time. And I'm supposed to meet the Pope for lunch, the guard replied. You got an appointment confirmation? Before Tatey could answer, another voice cut through the lobby. Is there a problem here? The man approaching looked like he'd stepped out of a mob movie, expensive suit, silver hair, and eyes that had seen too much, but his tone was respectful as he addressed her. You must be Miss Santos. I'm Vincent Castellano, Mr. Torino's assistant. Sorry about the confusion. The security guard's entire demeanor changed. Mr. Castellano, I didn't realize. It's fine, Tony. Miss Santos will be working with us for the next 2 weeks. Make sure she gets a temporary access card. As they rode the elevator up, Vincent studied her with calculating eyes. So you're the social worker? Not yet. Still working on my degree. But you want to help kids? Yes. Why? The directness of the question surprised her. Because someone should. Because most people write off kids from my neighborhood before they even get a chance. Vincent nodded slowly. Mr. Torino thinks highly of you. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. We just met yesterday. Did you? Before she could ask what he meant, the elevator opened onto a floor that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, while the decor managed to be both elegant and comfortable. This wasn't just an office, it was a statement of power. Tatey! She turned to see Jonathan approaching from what appeared to be a conference room. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, but his smile was warm and genuine. I see you met Vincent. Did he give you the intimidation speech? Not yet, Vincent said dryly. Was saving it for later. Ignore him. He thinks he's scary. Jonathan gestured toward his office. Coffee? I had my assistant stock up on that blend you mentioned liking. Tatey froze. She'd mentioned her favorite coffee in one of their text conversations, but Jonathan wasn't supposed to know about those texts. I'm sorry, she said carefully. A flicker of something passed across Jonathan's face, but he recovered smoothly. Blue note. You ordered it black yesterday. I assumed you had strong preferences. Plausible. But Tatey filed the moment away. Something was going on here, and she intended to figure out what. Jonathan's office was even more impressive than the reception area, but what caught her attention were the photographs on his desk. Family pictures, by the look of them. A younger version of Jonathan, with an older man who shared his features. Another photo of what appeared to be a wedding beautiful woman in white. Jonathan looking impossibly young and happy. Your family? She asked. Was. His voice went flat. My father died 5 years ago. My wife. That's a longer story. There was pain there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Tatey felt her wariness soften slightly. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Jonathan moved to the windows, looking out at the lake. But that's why this charity matters to me. Second chances, new opportunities. What happened to your wife? Jonathan was quiet for so long that Tatey thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, she was killed. Wrong place, wrong time. The simple words carried weight that made Tatey's chest tighten. I'm so sorry, Jonathan. She was a teacher, elementary school. She would have loved what we're trying to do here. For the first time since walking into the opulent office, Tatey saw past the wealth and power to the man underneath. Someone who'd lost everything that mattered and was trying to find meaning again. Tell me about the scholarship recipients, she said gently. The next hour passed quickly as Jonathan outlined his vision for the charity. 20 full scholarships for kids from the South Side, but more than that, mentorship programs, job placement assistance, ongoing support through college and beyond. The money is easy, he said. Writing checks doesn't require courage, but creating real change, that takes people who understand what these kids face. You really want to make a difference. I really do. He looked at her directly. The question is whether you believe that someone like me can change. Someone like you, wealthy, privileged, never had to worry about where my next meal was coming from. Tatey considered this. I think anyone can change if they want to, badly enough. The question is why you want to. Before Jonathan could answer, Vincent appeared in the doorway. Boss, we've got a situation. Tommy Marconi is here. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonathan's entire posture shifted, and suddenly Tati was looking at a different man, one who radiated danger, in a way that made her step back instinctively. What does he want? Says he wants to discuss the building sale. I thought that was handled. Apparently he's having second thoughts. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Give me 10 minutes, then bring him up. After Vincent left, Jonathan turned back to Tatey. I'm sorry, but we'll need to continue this later. Something urgent came up. Business emergency? Something like that. He paused. Tatey, can I ask you something? Of course. If you discovered that someone you cared about wasn't who you thought they were, would that change how you felt about them? The question was so unexpected that Tati blinked. I guess it would depend on who they really were and why they'd been hiding it. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid you'd say. As Vincent escorted her to the elevator, Tatey's mind raced. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't quite add up. The expensive office, Vincent's obvious deference mixed with familiarity, the way Jonathan's whole demeanor had changed at the mention of Tommy Marconi's name. Most telling of all, how did a legitimate businessman know someone like Tommy Marconi well enough for unannounced visits to be a problem? As the elevator descended, Tati realized she was either working for a man who was much more complicated than he seemed, or she was walking into something that could be very dangerous. But as she thought about the pain in Jonathan's eyes when he'd mentioned his wife and the genuine passion in his voice when he'd talked about helping kids, she realized something else. She was going to see this through, whatever the truth turned out to be. 7. Tommy Marconi was shorter than most men expected, but what he lacked in height, he made up for in vicious unpredictability. Johnny had been dealing with men like Tommy for 15 years, but this conversation was different. This time, Tommy had something Johnny wanted leverage over the building where Maria and Tati had lived. "Nice office, Johnny," Tommy said, settling into the chair across from Johnny's desk without being invited. "Very corporate, very legitimate. What do you want, Tommy?" "Straight to business, I like that." Tommy lit a cigarette despite the no-smoking signs. "I'm having second thoughts about our deal. The sale was final, papers were signed. Papers can be unsigned, especially when I find out who was really behind the purchase." Johnny kept his expression neutral. Meaning, I know Patterson Construction is just a shell. I know you bought that building through 3 different holding companies. Question is why a man like you gives a shit about low-income housing. This was the moment Johnny had been dreading. Tommy might be small-time, but he wasn't stupid. Maybe I'm diversifying my interests. Or maybe you're going soft. Tommy's eyes glittered with malice. Maybe you got yourself a personal interest in one of my former tenants. Johnny's blood went cold, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You're fishing, Tommy." "Am I? Because my boys tell me you've been seen around the south side a lot lately, and that's not your usual territory. I own property all over the city." "Sure you do, but you don't usually spend time in neighborhoods where the average income is below the poverty line." Tommy took a long drag of his cigarette. "Unless you got a reason." Johnny stood, moving to the windows. Below, Chicago sprawled in all directions, a city divided between gleaming towers and forgotten neighborhoods. Somewhere down there, Tati was probably at her new job, unaware that she'd become a piece in a game she didn't even know she was playing. "State your terms, Tommy." "Smart man. Here's what I want: a piece of your Riverside operation. Not much, just 10%. Think of it as a finder's fee for keeping my mouth shut about your extracurricular activities." The Riverside operation was Johnny's most profitable venture, a shipping hub that moved everything from legitimate cargo to less legitimate merchandise. 10% would cost him millions annually. And if I refuse, then people might start wondering why Johnny Torino is playing guardian angel to a cleaning lady and her daughter, might start asking questions about what makes them so special. Tommy's smile was ugly. Might be dangerous for everyone involved. The threat was clear. In Johnny's world, showing weakness was an invitation to destruction. If word got out that he could be compromised by personal feelings, every enemy he'd ever made would come for him, and anyone he cared about would become a target. "I need time to think about it." "Sure, take all the time you need." "But Johnny?" Tommy stood, crushing his cigarette on Johnny's antique desk. "Don't take too long. Patience isn't my strong suit." After Tommy left, Johnny sat in his office as the afternoon light faded over the lake. He could pay Tommy's price. 10% was manageable, and the silence would protect Tati and her family. But it would also set a precedent. Once Tommy knew he could be bought, the demands would escalate. The alternative was elimination. Tommy Marconi could disappear, and most people would assume he'd finally pushed the wrong person too far. But that would bring heat from Tommy's associates, attention from law enforcement, and questions Johnny couldn't afford. For the first time in his adult life, Johnny Torino didn't have a clean solution. His phone buzzed with a text from Tati. "Is everything okay? You seemed upset when I left." Johnny stared at the message for a long time. She was concerned about him, not his money, not his power, but him as a person. When was the last time someone had cared about his emotional state? He typed back, "Just business complications. Nothing that won't work itself out. Want to talk about it over dinner? Sometimes an outside perspective helps." Johnny's finger hovered over the reply button. Dinner with Tati sounded like the best thing that had happened to him in years. It also sounded like the most dangerous. "I wouldn't want to bore you with my problems. Try me. I'm a good listener, and I owe you dinner anyway for the job opportunity." Against his better judgment, Johnny found himself typing, "Do you know Il Posto on North Clark? Fancy Italian place? I've walked past it, but that's not exactly my budget range. 8 o'clock, I'll handle the reservation." There was a pause before her response. "Are you sure? That place is pretty expensive for a business dinner." Johnny realized she was giving him an out, a chance to clarify that this was purely professional. The smart thing would be to take it, the safe thing. Instead, he typed, "Not a business dinner, just dinner." Another pause, longer this time. Finally, "I'll be there." As Johnny put his phone away, he wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. In 6 hours, he'd be sitting across from a woman who represented everything good he'd ever wanted but could never have. A woman who would run if she knew the truth about what he was and what he'd done. But as he looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness, Johnny realized he was past caring about smart or safe. Some things were worth the risk, even if they destroyed you. 8. Il Posto was exactly the kind of restaurant where Chicago's elite went to see and be seen. Intimate lighting, white tablecloths, and prices that could feed a family for a week. Johnny arrived early and requested a corner table, somewhere they could talk without being overheard. When Tati walked in, every conversation in the restaurant seemed to pause. She wore a simple blue dress that probably came from a department store, but she moved through the opulent room with quiet confidence. Johnny stood as the maitre d' escorted her to the table. "You look beautiful," he said, meaning it. "Thank you." She glanced around the restaurant with wide eyes. "This place is incredible. I feel like I should have dressed up more." "You're perfect." They settled into their seats, and Johnny found himself studying her face in the candlelight. There was intelligence in her dark eyes, strength in the set of her jaw, and something else, a wariness that suggested she was still trying to figure him out. "So," she said after they'd ordered wine, "tell me about these business complications. It's not that simple. Most things aren't. But sometimes talking through problems helps you see solutions you might have missed." Johnny considered how much he could tell her without revealing the full truth. "Someone from my past is trying to leverage information about me. Information that could be damaging if it became public. Business information? Personal information." Tati sipped her wine thoughtfully. "And this person wants money to keep quiet, among other things. What kind of personal information could be that damaging in a business context?" It was a perceptive question, and Johnny realized that Tati's mind worked faster than most people gave her credit for. The kind that makes people think you're weak. In my business, perception of weakness can be fatal. "What business are you really in, Jonathan?" The direct question caught him off guard. Johnny had been preparing for this moment since he'd first seen her in the diner, but actually facing it was different than anticipating it. "What do you mean?" "I mean that legitimate developers don't usually have meetings with people like Tommy Marconi. They don't have assistants who look like Vincent, and they don't worry about information that could be fatal to their business." Johnny set down his wine glass carefully. "How you've been thinking about this?" "I've been thinking about a lot of things, like how my mother suddenly got the perfect job after working for peanuts, like how our apartment building was purchased by a company that seems to exist only on paper, like how you knew my coffee preferences after meeting me once, Tati, and like how you keep getting text messages from an unknown number that make you smile." Johnny's blood went cold. "What?" "The number you've been texting for weeks. The person you talk to about books and movies and guardian angels." She leaned forward. "It's me, isn't it? You're the mysterious texter who's been brightening my days." For a moment, Johnny couldn't speak. The conversation had spun completely out of his control. "How did you—" The coffee comment gave it away, but I've suspected for days. Her voice was calm, but Johnny could see the storm brewing in her eyes. "The question is why? Why the elaborate charade? Why the fake identity for our text conversations? Why all the secrecy?" Johnny looked around the restaurant, acutely aware of how exposed they were. This conversation could destroy everything he'd worked for, but Tati deserved the truth, at least some of it. "Because I wanted to know you as myself, not as what I am professionally." "And what are you professionally?" "Someone who solves problems that can't be solved through legal channels." Tati absorbed this for a long moment. "Organized crime." It wasn't a question, but Johnny nodded anyway. "The charity, the scholarship money, is any of that real?" "All of it. Every penny comes from legitimate businesses I own. But the source of the original money was complicated." They sat in silence while the waiter brought their appetizers. Johnny waited for Tati to stand up and walk away, to realize she was sitting across from a man who'd done things that would horrify her. Instead, she asked, "Did you kill anyone?" The bluntness of the question shocked him. "What? It's a simple question. Have you killed people?" Johnny thought about lying, but Tati would see through it. "Yes." "Recently?" "No, not in 5 years." "Why not?" "Because I got tired of being that person." "What changed?" "My wife's death. She was killed because of what I was, the enemies I'd made. After that, I started trying to be different, better." "And the charity work?" "Started as guilt relief, became something more important." Tati nodded slowly, processing this information with more calm than Johnny had any right to expect. "The person threatening you now, Tommy Marconi, he knows about me, doesn't he? He suspects. And that gives him leverage, because associating with me makes you look weak." "Yes. So what are you going to do about it?" Johnny met her eyes. "I don't know. In the old days, the solution would have been simple, but I don't want to be that person anymore, not for you." "For me?" "Because you make me want to be better than what I am. Because when I look at you, I remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond money and power." Johnny's voice was rough. "Because I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced." Tati was quiet for so long that Johnny began to think he'd lost her completely. Finally, she spoke. "I should walk away. Everything about this situation screams danger." "You should," Johnny agreed. "But I'm not going to." "Why not?" "Because you helped my family when you didn't have to, because you've been honest with me when you could have kept lying, and because—" She took a shaky breath. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you too." Johnny felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked away since the day he'd buried his wife. "This won't be easy," he said. "My world is dangerous. So is mine. Different kind of danger, but danger nonetheless. People will try to hurt you to get to me. Then you'll have to make sure they don't succeed." Johnny reached across the table and took her hand. "Tati, I need you to understand what you're signing up for. I'm trying to be better, but I'm still the man who built an empire on violence. There are parts of my life that you can never be involved in, decisions I might have to make that you won't understand." "I know," she squeezed his hand, "but everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even you." As they sat in the candlelit restaurant, Johnny realized that for the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. The question was whether he could protect it without destroying it in the process. 9. The attack came 3 days later. Tati was leaving the Patterson Services office when she noticed the black SUV following her down Michigan Avenue. At first, she thought it was paranoia Jonathan had spent the past few days explaining the security precautions she'd need to take. Don't walk alone after dark. Vary her routes. Always be aware of her surroundings. But as she turned onto a side street and the SUV turned with her, Tati knew this wasn't paranoia. She ducked into a crowded Starbucks and pulled out her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed Jonathan's number. "Tati? What's wrong?" "There's a car following me. Black SUV, tinted windows." "Where are you?" "Starbucks on East Ontario." "Stay exactly where you are. Vincent is 2 minutes away." "Jonathan, I'm scared." "I know, baby. Just stay calm and stay visible. Nobody will try anything in a crowded place." The endearment helped steady her nerves. Over the past 3 days, they'd talked for hours about his world and what being with him would mean. She thought she'd been prepared for the reality of dating a man with enemies. She'd been wrong. Vincent arrived with 2 other men, all of them moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested military training. He approached her table with a reassuring smile. "Miss Santos, I'm here to take you somewhere safe." The ride to Jonathan's penthouse passed in silence, Vincent's men flanking their car while he spoke quietly into a radio. Tati stared out the window at the city she'd lived in her entire life, wondering if it would ever feel safe again. Jonathan was waiting in his lobby, and the relief on his face when he saw her was almost overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms without caring who saw, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so fucking sorry." In the elevator to his penthouse, Vincent briefed them on what he'd learned. 3 men in the SUV, all connected to Tommy Marconi. They weren't planning to grab her today, just sending a message. "What kind of message?" Tati asked. "The kind that says they can get to you whenever they want," Jonathan said grimly. The penthouse was stunning floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city, furniture that belonged in architectural magazines, art that probably cost more than most people's houses, but Tati barely noticed. Her hands were still shaking. "Vincent, I want security on her 24/7, Jonathan said. And I want every detail about Tommy's current operations. Already in progress. But boss, we need to consider more permanent solutions. No. The word came out flat and final. We're not going back to the old ways. With respect, the old ways would solve this problem permanently. And create 10 new ones. Plus Tatey would never forgive me. Tatey looked between them, understanding the subtext. Vincent was talking about killing Tommy Marconi, and Jonathan was refusing. Because of her. What if you just paid him? She asked. If it's only money. It's never only money, Jonathan said. Once someone like Tommy knows they can extort you, it never stops. Next month it'll be 20%, then 50%. Eventually he'd want partnership in everything I do. So what are the options? Legitimate ones? Not many. Jonathan poured himself a scotch with hands that weren't entirely steady. I could try to get evidence of Tommy's crimes, turn him over to the FBI, but that would take months and there's no guarantee it would work. And illegitimate options. We don't discuss those. Tatey walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could afford textbooks for next semester. Now she was under police protection because a man she'd never met wanted to use her as leverage against the man she loved. This is my fault, she said quietly. No. Jonathan was beside her instantly. This is my fault. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you better. You can't protect me from your entire past. I can try. She turned to face him. Jonathan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Anything. If something happened to me, if Tommy Marconi hurt me, what would you do? Jonathan's face went very still. Tatey, answer the question. You don't want to know the answer to that question. Yes, I do. Because if we're going to make this work, if we're going to build something together, I need to know who you really are. Not who you're trying to be, but who you are right now. Today. Johnny was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. If anyone hurt you, I would burn down everything they'd ever loved before I killed them. I would make sure their death was slow enough for them to understand exactly why it was happening, and then I would probably hate myself for the rest of my life, but I would do it anyway. The honesty of it hit Tatey like a physical blow. This was the man she was falling in love with, someone capable of profound tenderness and shocking violence, often in the same moment. That's what I thought, she said. Does that scare you? Yes, but not the way you think. She moved closer to him. What scares me is that I'm not sure I'd want to stop you. Something shifted in Jonathan's eyes. Tatey, I've spent my whole life watching bullies prey on people who couldn't fight back. Part of me likes knowing that you could fight back, that you could protect the people you love. That's a dangerous way to think. Maybe, but it's honest. She took his hands in hers. I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. Jonathan, I'm asking you to be the best version of yourself. Can you do that? For you, I can try. Then we'll figure this out. Together. As they stood in the penthouse overlooking the city, Tatey realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She was no longer just dating a man with a complicated past. She was choosing to build a life with someone whose enemies were now her enemies. But as Jonathan pulled her close, as she felt the strength in his arms and the steady beat of his heart, Tatey knew she'd made the right choice, even if it destroyed them both. 10. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a private dining room at the Palmer House Hotel, carefully chosen for its history of hosting delicate negotiations. Johnny arrived with Vincent and one other man, while Tommy brought 2 associates who looked like they'd been hired for their intimidation factor rather than their intelligence. Johnny, Tommy said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, thanks for accepting my invitation. Let's skip the pleasantries, Tommy. What do you want? Same thing I wanted last week. Partnership, respect, a seat at the grown-ups table. My answer hasn't changed. Tommy's smile widened. Maybe this will help change your mind. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photographs Tatey leaving her apartment, walking to work, having coffee with friends. The final photo showed her through the window of Jonathan's penthouse, clearly taken with a telephoto lens. Johnny's vision went red around the edges, but he forced himself to remain calm. You're making a mistake, Tommy. Am I? Because from where I sit, it looks like I'm holding all the cards. Tommy leaned back in his chair. Pretty girl. Be a shame if something happened to her. If you touch her, you'll what? Kill me? Tommy laughed. We both know you've gone soft, Johnny. Word is you haven't pulled a trigger in 5 years. Word is you're trying to play the legitimate businessman now. Reputations can be deceiving. Can they? Because I'm thinking maybe it's time to test that theory. Vincent's hand moved slightly toward his jacket, but Johnny caught his eye and shook his head almost imperceptibly. This wasn't the time or place for violence. State your terms, Johnny said. Same as before, 20% of Riverside plus monthly payments of $50,000 for my discretion regarding your personal life. The numbers had doubled, just as Johnny had predicted. Tommy was getting greedy. And in exchange, your girlfriend gets to keep breathing. Your charity work continues unmolested. Everybody wins. Johnny pretended to consider this, buying time to think. Paying Tommy would solve the immediate problem, but create long-term weakness. Refusing would escalate the situation beyond his ability to control it peacefully, unless there was a third option. I need 24 hours to consider your proposal, Johnny said finally. Sure, but Johnny, Tommy's voice carried genuine menace. Don't keep me waiting too long. Patience really isn't my virtue. After Tommy left, Johnny and Vincent remained in the dining room. The older man's face was grim. This can't continue, Vincent said. Every day we let Tommy operate freely, he gets bolder. I know. The girl's in real danger. He's not bluffing about hurting her. I know that too. So what are we going to do about it? Johnny looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there. Tati was at work, probably unaware of how close she'd come to being photographed in his most private moments. We're going to end this, Johnny said quietly, but not the way Tommy expects. What do you mean? Tommy's operating under the assumption that I've gone completely legitimate, that I no longer have the resources or the willingness to fight back. Haven't you? Some things are worth making exceptions for. Vincent studied his boss's face carefully. What are you planning? Tommy thinks he knows all my weaknesses, but he's forgotten that the reason I survived 15 years in this business wasn't because I was the strongest or the most vicious. Johnny turned away from the window. It was because I was smarter. Boss, set up a meeting with federal agent Sarah Chen, the one who's been trying to build a case against Tommy for 2 years. You're going to cooperate with the FBI? I'm going to give them everything they need to put Tommy away for life. His drug operations, his money laundering, his connections to 3 unsolved murders in the past year. That's a lot of information to have about someone you supposedly don't deal with. Knowledge is power. Vincent, I've been collecting information about Tommy for years, just in case. And what makes you think the FBI will cut a deal with you? Because what I'm offering them is worth more than anything they could get by prosecuting me. Tommy Marconi is their white whale, the case that could make careers. And what do you get out of it? Immunity for past crimes, protection for Tati, and the chance to actually become the legitimate businessman I've been pretending to be. Vincent was quiet for a long time. That's assuming Agent Chen is willing to deal. She will be. Sarah Chen has been after Tommy for 2 years with nothing to show for it. I'm offering her a gift-wrapped conviction. And if she's not, Johnny's expression went cold in a way that reminded Vincent of the old days.